Welcome back to Intro to Philosophy 1010. This is the first reading for part 4 of our book, and I've already put up the videos for the last 2 readings, as I explained in both of those, which were Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil and Grace Clement's The Ideal Types of Care and Justice. I started with those so that you'd have something to work with for the discussion forum, the final 4th discussion forum. So with that done, I'm turning back to the beginning of part 4, and the fundamental question we are discussing in this final part of the book is, what should I do and who should I be? So we went through these other fundamental questions, and the first one was, who or what am I? The second was, what is real? The third was, what can I know? And those questions are necessary to answer before you can ask this final question. What should I do and who should I be? So who am I? What is even the field of reality? Can I even know it? Once you've got answers to those questions, or at least working hypotheses, then you can venture a guess to the question of what, the ethical question. So this is the final part. It's the pragmatic part. How does all this knowledge help you act in the world? That's what people will be discussing in the various readings. So the first one, chronologically, this is the Bhagavad Gita. So that's one chapter from a Hindu, a much larger Hindu tome, the Mahabharata. And this is just one chapter, and it's the Bhagavad means the Supreme Person, and Gita means song. So it's the song of the Supreme Person, in this case Krishna, who is Vishnu. So the first discussion question will be to compare the Katha Upanishad, which was the very first reading of the book, to this Bhagavad Gita, which is the first reading of part 4. And the philosophy is the same. The philosophy is identical. It's just the story's different. In the Katha Upanishad, it was Yamaraj, the god of death, talking to the young Brahmin boy Nachiketa, who he ended up in the underworld because he interrupted his father during a fire sacrifice. And next thing you know, he's waiting around for Yamaraj. Yamaraj felt bad for making him wait for 3 days, so he offered him 3 wishes, and for his 3 wishes, one of them he asked, what happens to, is there a soul, does it live forever? And Yamaraj reluctantly gave him the answers, and the ultimate conclusion was, control your sense desires and head down the path of knowledge, avoid the path of pleasure, and the goal is Vishnu, the Supreme Person. And then once you've reunited with Vishnu, then you escape the cycle of reincarnation, and you don't have to suffer this material illusion anymore. That's the same basic message here. Only the story here is Krishna and Arjuna, his cousin, also his devotee. They're both warriors, members of the warrior caste, and the scene is a civil war between 2 sides of these families vying for who should be the king of the world. And the Pandavas, the sons of Pandu, are on one side, and the sons of Dhritarashtra, that's the first name here on page 373, they're on the other side, and they're headed by his eldest son Duryodhana. Let me zap this phone here. So okay, so Arjuna, seeing his relatives on both sides, decides that he doesn't want to fight. He starts to weep. The hairs on the back of his neck start to stand up. His mouth dries up. And he just says, I'd rather let them kill me unarmed than endure the misery of having to kill my relatives and let them kill my other friends, and this end of our civilization will result. maybe it's better to just let them win even though they're evil. So he asked Krishna, who's the chariot driver, pull me in between these two sides of the army. Then he saw that, and that's what he said to Krishna. And Krishna smiled slightly and began to teach him about the eternality of the soul. Nobody dies. Why are you grieving? It's as if you didn't know about the difference between the body and the soul. Furthermore, it's your duty as a member of the warrior caste to fight. And even if the worst case scenario happens and the end of this religious civilization based on the authority of the Vedas comes to pass because all of the fathers of the families are dead and the family tradition dies, that doesn't matter. Whatever the consequences of your actions are, don't matter. Just be attached to doing your duty, which in this case is fighting the righteous battle. And the bottom of page 377, your business is with action alone, not by any means with fruit. Let not the fruit of action be your motive to action. Let not your attachment be fixed on inaction. Having recourse to devotion, O Dhananjaya, that's another name for Arjuna, perform actions, casting off all attachment, and being equable in success or ill success. Such equability is called devotion. So, in the Bhagavad Gita, at the end of chapter 2 here, he's telling Arjuna, who's been explaining all of the negative consequences that could come from him engaging in this battle. He says, don't worry about the results of your action. Don't worry about the fruit of your action. The fruit that grows from a tree, the results that grow from your actions, they're not your concern. Your only concern is doing your duty, and ultimately Krishna is telling Arjuna, your ultimate duty is devotion to me. I am telling you to do it. You should be devoted to me because I am the supreme being, the supreme soul. And then and only then will you be calm in your mind and not so agitated like you are now, and free from sin, free from the good and negative effects of your actions, and you can escape the cycle of reincarnation. With that, I will turn to these discussion questions, and we'll get into some more of the detail while we're answering those. So on page 383, discussion question 1, explain how the Hindu views here in the Bhagavad Gita fit in with the views we saw earlier in the Katha Upanishad. So there's so many ways, so many detailed ways that you could compare the two. I think a good place to start is in the Katha Upanishad, the analogy of the chariot. So we know there's the Buddhist chariot analogy to demonstrate that there is no individual self. Is the chariot, like the word chariot is just a word for a single thing, but no single thing really exists. It's a bunch of different parts. And the idea is similarly, there's a word self, but it doesn't refer to a single thing. It refers to a bunch of different thoughts and body parts, and so there's no actual enduring and eternal self. That's the Buddhist philosophy of anatman, no atman. The Katha Upanishad and the Bhagavad Gita do believe in atman. There is an eternal individual self. And the chariot analogy in the Katha Upanishad is, imagine the self to be the passenger in the chariot, the intelligence to be the charioteer, the driver of the chariot, the mind to be the reins that are holding the horses, which represent the sense organs and your sense desires. So if you can control your sense desires, if your intelligence and your mind can control the sense desires, then you can guide the chariot down the road ultimately towards Vishnu, the supreme Atman. If you can't control your sense desires, they pull you off of the road of knowledge into the path of pleasure, and you are subject to reincarnation again and again. In the Bhagavad Gita, the chariot is a symbol again, and it's Krishna who is serving as Arjuna's intelligence. And Arjuna says, tell me what to do. He asks Krishna at first, tell me what to do, but then he says, I'm not going to fight. And then Krishna begins the process of convincing him in the end ultimately to fight. And as the story goes on, Arjuna does fight, especially after he sees Krishna reveal his form as the universe itself, the universal form, all-devouring time. Death, I am, destroyer of worlds. There's different translations of it. The most famous use of that quote comes from Dr. Oppenheimer, head of the American atomic bomb program, the Manhattan Project. So, you can just see the parallels between the Katha Upanishad and the Bhagavad Gita with the chariot in both. And Krishna is serving as Arjuna's intelligence, but he's also the goal of the road, Vishnu. So let me just go to that example. So way back at the beginning of the book, page 9, and I'll read a little bit. So, page 9, the bottom part of the page, chapter 3, verse 1, 2 there are who dwell within the body in the intellect, the supreme akasha of the heart. So there's your individual soul and there's the supreme soul. Number 3, at the very bottom of page 9, know the Atman to be the master of the chariot, the body, chariot, the intellect, charioteer, and the mind, the reins. The senses, they say, are the horses, the objects, the roads. The wise call the Atman, united with the body, the senses, and the mind, the enjoyer. So, as I explained, if your mind controls the senses, then you don't have to be born again. If you skip down on page 10 to verse 9, a man who has his discrimination for his charioteer holds the reins of the mind firmly, reaches the end of the road, and that is the supreme position of Vishnu. The supreme, that's the end of the road. And if you look over on page 13, verse 8, it says, beyond the senses is the mind, beyond the mind is the intellect, higher than the intellect is the great Atman, higher than the great Atman is the unmanifest. Beyond the unmanifest is the person, all-pervading and imperceptible. So that person is Vishnu. Continuing, he says, his form is not an object of vision. No one beholds him with the eye. One can know him when he is revealed by the intellect, free from doubt, and by constant meditation. Those who know this become immortal. And then we will conclude on this page. With this, the firm control of the senses is what is called yoga. So, comparing this to the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna recommends to Arjuna devotion to himself, to Krishna, to Vishnu, the Supreme Person, and that is called yoga. In this instance, it's different from the yoga that normally people think of as body postures and breathing techniques. This is the yoga of just devotion, a devotional attitude to the Supreme Being. So, for example, Christianity emphasizes love of God. That would be classified as this bhakti yoga, which is just the union or the calming of the senses by focusing them on devotion to the Supreme Atman. So that's a good way to start the comparisons. Notice there that Krishna says no one, well, in the Katha Upanishad, Yamaraj is telling Nachiketa about the Supreme Person. One can know him, his form is not an object of vision, no one beholds him with the eye, one can know him when he is revealed by the intellect free from doubt. So he's knowable, but not easily knowable, and in the Bhagavad Gita, at the bottom of page 376, for example, when Krishna is talking about the soul that cannot be killed, he's trying to convince Arjuna, don't worry, even though you'll be cutting people up with your arrows and people will be getting their heads chopped off, no soul on this battlefield will die. It can't be cut, it can't be burned or drowned. It is not divisible. At the bottom of page 376, it is not combustible, it is not moistened, it is not to be dried up. It is everlasting, all-pervading, stable, firm, and eternal. It is said to be unperceived, to be unthinkable, to be unchangeable. Therefore, knowing it to be such, you ought not to grieve. But even if you think that it is constantly born and constantly dies, still, O you of mighty arms, you ought not to grieve thus. All right, so I'll continue there, but the lesson was you can't see the soul, you can't even think what it is in any clear way, but if the Supreme Soul reveals himself to you, then you can know it. And so let me just look for a couple of other clear parallels between the two texts. If you look on page 376, Krishna says right in the middle of the page, the contacts of the senses, O son of Kunti, that's Arjuna, which produce cold and heat, pleasure and pain, are not permanent. They are ever coming and going. Bear them, with a calm mind. Bear these pairs of opposites. Over on the bottom of page 377, he says, do you, O Arjuna, rise above those effects of the three qualities, that means the three modes of material nature, and be free from the pairs of opposites. Always preserve courage, be free from anxiety for new acquisitions or protection of old acquisitions, and be self-controlled. So the idea of controlling the senses is central to both of these texts. You can look at, and we looked at the chariot analogy, for example, control the horses, and it's repeated several times in both of these texts. Okay, so, all right, I'm going to read this important quote when we get to I think the third discussion question. But going back to the discussion questions on page 383, number 2, Krishna calls Arjuna a coward, weak of heart in our translation at the beginning of chapter 2 of the Gita. Based on Arjuna's speech in chapter 1, do you think he is a coward? Why or why not? Explain. So Arjuna was going through the reasons to Krishna of why he didn't want to fight. And it helps to understand some of this Hindu philosophy, to understand how upset he was, because it wasn't only the fact that the people who raised him from his boyhood and taught him and educated him, his family members, his cousins, his grandfathers, and it wasn't only his personal family relationships that were making him so sad to engage in this battle. It was the belief that if all of these fathers on the battlefield were killed, their families would lose the traditional Vedic ceremonies, which unites them with their dead ancestors. So they would say prayers and offer food to the ancestors to keep them in their proper position in the afterlife. And if this civilization was to fall apart, not only would Arjuna and his friends go to hell for creating such havoc, but their ancestors would go to hell, the families would become polluted, there'd be an intermingling of castes, and so it would be really the end of a religious era and the beginning of a dark age. So it was a global concern he had, that even if we win this battle, it's inevitably going to set into effect this downfall of this advanced civilization. And according to that religion, they had traffic with higher civilizations from other planets. We saw Nick Bostrom talk about that. Well, this ancient Hinduism assumes that, yes, there are much higher civilizations than ours currently on Earth. And in the past, Earth was a higher civilization, and that travel between planets was commonplace. So Arjuna was saying that's going to come to an end because of this world war. And he dropped his bow and he felt these horrible omens coming. And he begged Krishna to help him. And he said it wasn't that he was going to leave the battlefield and run away. He was going to drop his weapons and just let himself get killed. So I'll read a little bit here from the top of page 375. So after Arjuna tells Krishna to drive him in between the two armies in the chariot, he sees all of his relatives, his maternal uncle's father-in-law, grandsons, brothers-in-law, as also other relatives. Then he says, "These I do not wish to kill, though they kill me, O destroyer of Madhu, even for the sake of sovereignty over the three worlds, how much less than for this earth alone. What joy shall be ours, O Ganardhan, after killing Dhritarashtra's sons? Killing these felons, we shall only incur sin. Therefore it is not proper for us to kill our own kinsmen, the sons of Dhritarashtra. For how, O Madhava, shall we be happy after killing our own relatives? So if you read through there, he keeps saying, how are we ever going to be happy? How will we enjoy ourselves? We'll be so sad. We'll have such tremendous grief. So he's thinking all the time of his own happiness. Even though he's saying, oh, these evil sons of Dhritarashtra, all they think about is their own selfish pleasure. But in fact, the primary motive that was keeping Arjuna from killing them was his concern for his own pleasure. How can we be happy after we kill our relatives? So he was attached to his own happiness, and he was being tormented by grief, and it was this polarity that Krishna was going to tell him, get that under control. Don't be swayed by these pairs of opposites, desire for happiness and a desire not to have grief or pain. Be unconcerned with the consequences of your actions and just focus on your devotion to me. Then you will have a tranquil mind. No matter what catastrophes are happening around you, inwardly you'll be calm. That's what he's going to tell Arjuna. But if you read lower on page 375, he explains about how the process of the downfall of civilization and the ancestors will fall to hell. So he says in the middle of page 375, if the sons of Dhritarashtra, weapon in hand, should kill me in battle, me weaponless and not defending myself, that would be better for me. And then at the bottom of 375, to him who was thus overcome with pity and dejected, and whose eyes were full of tears and turbid, the destroyer of Madhu spoke these words. The deity said, how come it that this delusion, O Arjuna, which is discarded by the good, which excludes from heaven and occasions infamy, has overtaken you in this place of peril? Be not effeminate, O son of Pritha, it is not worthy of you. Cast off this base weakness of heart, and arise, O terror of your foes. So, back to this discussion question on page 383, Krishna calls Arjuna a coward, weak of heart. So based on Arjuna's speech, do you think he is a coward? So you can answer that either way, just as long as you have knowledge of the conversation between Arjuna and Krishna. Some people would say, I don't think he was a coward because he didn't want to run away, he was willing to die, he wasn't afraid to die, he was afraid to kill. And is that really a coward, or is that true courage? And then other people would say, well, he was a coward because he was afraid of the grief he would have to suffer after doing his duty and killing his kinsmen. So either way, just know the elements involved. So discussion question 3, page 383. One element of the ethic being advocated here is the idea of not paying attention to the result of an action when determining what to do. Why is this difficult to put into practice? Explain. To me, that seems very commonsensical. Why is it difficult not to be concerned with the results of your actions? For example, I'm teaching this class, I'm making these YouTube videos, I'm grading exams and discussions and journals. Why am I doing it? Well, for one reason, I like to spend my time studying philosophy and talking about it to other people, but also I got to pay the rent, and so I need a paycheck. Why would it be difficult for me not to worry about whether I'm going to get paid or not? Because if I don't get paid, then I won't have a place to live. And, the people who depend on me, we're going to be in trouble. And all of these concerns about negative things that can happen in the future, they're going to make me and other people miserable. It makes it hard for me not to be concerned with the results of my action. But that's exactly what Krishna was telling Arjuna, who was a wreck because of his concern for what the results of his actions were going to be. Krishna said, in this case, you have a clear duty. You're a member of the warrior caste, so there's this caste system, and I'll explain a little bit about that, because this is the civilization based on this caste system that Arjuna said this war was going to destroy. So I've discussed this before when I gave the video on the Katha Upanishad, but there's 4 castes. It's like a pyramid. At the top of the caste are the Brahmins. So Brahman is the flip side of Atman. Brahman is the all-pervasive, impersonal ocean of waves of potential personality, and Atman is the individual souls, the personal side. So the Brahmins have knowledge of Brahman. They're the educated class. Not that the other classes aren't, but they're highly educated. That's the essence of their duty to society, to teach people about the difference between matter and the soul. Then there's the warrior caste on the pyramid, the second caste down, and they're also philosophically educated, but also educated in the art of war and administrating the state. So they were warrior politicians. They were the administrative executive branch of the government, kind of. And then beneath them was the Vaishya caste, the merchants, the landed gentry who took care of cows and crops. And beneath them were the laborer caste, who served the higher three castes. They were called Shudras. And beneath them were the outcasts. So the four castes are as discussed. And Arjuna, so the warrior caste has certain duties that they have to fulfill, and there's certain characteristics that they display, and that's how it's determined who is and who isn't one of these kshatriyas. And so Krishna says to Arjuna, he says, I'm looking at these two quotes very similar. On page 376, the deity said, "You have grieved for those," this is right in the middle of the page, "you have grieved for those who deserve no grief, and you talk words of wisdom." He was being sarcastic. "Learned men grieve not for the living nor the dead." And then on the other side of the page 377, he says, "This embodied self within everyone's body is ever indestructible. Therefore you ought not to grieve for any being. Having regard to your own duty also, you ought not to falter. For there is nothing better for a kshatriya than a righteous battle. Happy those kshatriyas, O son of Pritha, who can find such a battle to fight come of itself, an open door to heaven." So according to the Vedic tradition, if you're a warrior and you die in battle, you go to the heavenly planets. That doesn't mean you escape the cycle of reincarnation, but you at least get to take a body that lives a long time and has heavenly pleasures, and then you can come back into one of the earthly type planets. And he says, if you don't die, then you're the king of the earth. You and your family. So, but if you throw down your bow and don't fight, then others are going to call you a coward. And for a warrior who's been praised before for his prowess in battle, to be called a coward is worse than death. You think you'll be able to handle it now, but you won't be able to handle it. And he gives all these practical reasons. You ought to just fight. You're not going to be able to live with yourself. Look alike on pleasure and pain, gain and loss, victory and defeat. Don't be swayed by these pairs of opposites. He kind of changes it up. First of all, you don't want to be dishonored. You wouldn't be able to handle it. Then he goes to say, who cares if you're dishonored or honored? None of that matters. All that matters is that you do your duty. And as a warrior, it's your duty to fight sinful people who are trying to run the government. If you're a warrior who should be running the government, then your duty is to fight them. So it was hard for, going back to this discussion question on page 383, discussion question 3, why is it hard not to pay attention to the result of an action? It would be hard for Arjuna not to worry about the downfall of his entire civilization, because he would be impossibly miserable in the aftermath. It would be hard for anyone to do anything in life thinking, oh, I'm only doing this as a form of service to the Supreme Being. Most of us are going to be thinking, I got to pay for gas. I'm not going to be able to even get to work if I don't get the... So that answer to that discussion question, I think, is more or less the same answer to the final discussion question, at the bottom of page 383. Another element of the ethic being advocated here is the idea of being in control of our emotions and not letting pleasure enter into our decision-making process. Why is this difficult to put into practice? Explain. Why is it difficult not to let pleasure enter into our decision-making process? Well, because we all have a very strong desire for pleasure and a very strong aversion to pain. It's just human instinct to shy away from pain and to draw towards pleasure. So if someone tells you, don't be concerned with the pleasure or pain involved with what you're doing, that goes against the basic human impulse. But that is exactly what Krishna is saying. Learn to control that. It's not that it's going to be easy, but if you can control your desires and your aversions and get these pairs of opposites, happiness and sadness and all the rest of them, under control, then you can have a tranquil mind. If you have a tranquil mind, then you can meditate on your devotion to the Supreme Soul. But I'll just read a little bit here on page 378, about a third of the way down. The deity said, when a man, O son of Pritha, abandons all the desires of his heart and is pleased in his self only and by his self, he is then called one of steady mind. He whose heart is not agitated in the midst of calamities, who has no longing for pleasures, and from whom the feelings of affection, fear, and wrath have departed, is called a sage of steady mind. His mind is steady, who, being without attachments anywhere, feels no exaltation and no aversion on encountering the various agreeable and disagreeable things of this world. A man's mind is steady when he withdraws his senses from all objects of sense, as the tortoise withdraws its limbs from all sides. Objects of sense draw back from a person who is abstinent. Not so the taste for those objects, but even the taste departs from him when he has seen the Supreme. The boisterous senses, O son of Kunti, carry away by force the mind even of a wise man who exerts himself for final emancipation. Restraining them all, a man should remain engaged in devotion, making me his only resort. So, why is it hard not to let pleasure enter into our decision-making processes? Because even for someone who's abstinent, the taste for those objects remains nagging. So if you've ever, been addicted to something, not necessarily some hardcore drug, but maybe you're addicted to coffee cake or coffee or any pleasure that you enjoy, and then you decide, I want to stop engaging in that pleasure, then in the back of your mind, hey, well, wouldn't it be nice to go do whatever it is that you were habituated to doing? So it's just difficult. And Krishna's just saying, his advice is make me your only resort. So think of the Supreme Soul, the source of space and time, the source of the universe. Later in the Bhagavad Gita, he'll show him, look, I really am the universe. You and only you will be able to perceive this now. And then Arjuna sees all of the soldiers rushing into Krishna's flaming mouths, all of space and time and all of the planets. So how can you do the apparently impossible task of controlling the wandering sense desires? He'll say through yoga, bhakti yoga, devotional, a sense of devotional surrender. And that will be the end of the Bhagavad Gita. So the next video will be about the next reading, the Akaranga Sutra, which is from the Jain religion. It's the Jain ethics. And it's not a very long one. And after that will come the beginning of Buddha's preaching. So the whole fundamental question that's being asked and discussed in this part of the book is, what should I do and who should I be? And we will be back with the Akaranga Sutra.